Good morning, everyone. Shavua Tov. We are in Mishna Ma'aser Sheni, Perek Gimel, Chapter 3, Mishnah Yud Beis, Mishnah 12. Hamashil kan kanim l'Ma'aser Sheni. You lend barrels to someone for the storage of Ma'aser Sheni. Hamash kan Ma'aser Sheni, somebody who lends his containers for the storage of Ma'aser Sheni. Afa pi shegafan, even though he has sealed them on top, he's sealed them closed. Like kana meiser, the mice does not acquire. So we'll get a better understanding of this when we read further. But the case is that you have these containers, and you're filling the containers with Ma'aser Sheni wine. The wine is already Ma'aser Sheni. You're filling the containers with them, even though you've closed the containers on top. Nonetheless, Ma'aser does not acquire these containers, these jugs, whatever they are, kankanim. These containers do not get the sanctity of Ma'aser Sheni. Zalaf l'seichen stam. Let's say the case was where you poured into these containers wine that was not designated Ma'aser Sheni. It was tevel. It was wine that needs Ma'aser Sheni to be taken from it, but it wasn't done when you put it into the containers. Excuse me. Achelei gafan. So again, if this happened, that let's say, so you poured the wine in, and you then declared it Ma'aser Sheni. So achelei gafan, if this happened, if you declared a Ma'aser Sheni before you covered it, like kana meiser, the Ma'aser does not acquire the barrels, the containers rather. Bisha gafan, but if after you close them on top, if after you close the containers, that's when you declared it Ma'aser Sheni, the wine inside being Ma'aser Sheni, kana meiser, then Ma'aser does acquire the barrels. So that means like this. In the second case, what you've done is you've poured in wine. It wasn't Ma'aser Sheni when you poured it in. And then after it was in the container, that's when you declare that the wine in here should be Ma'aser Sheni, that you need to separate. So we say like this. If when you declared the wine in the barrel Ma'aser Sheni, the barrel was open, so then nothing happens to the container itself. But if you've already closed the container, and when you close the container, we see the wine in the container now is 1 unit. So now when the container and the wine become 1 unit, that's when you declare the wine inside of it as Ma'aser Sheni. Then the container itself will take on the sanctity of the Ma'aser Sheni. Because again, once you go ahead and you close the container, then we say that right. So once you close it, it's considered 1 unit, and as 1 unit, this barrel, this container is subordinate to the wine. So we say then when you sanctify the wine as Ma'aser Sheni, the sanctity goes onto the barrel, to the container itself. So if the container is uncovered, so then we look at separate things. We look at it as the wine being held in the container. It's 2 separate things. When I declare the Ma'aser Sheni on the wine, it doesn't affect the container. But once I close the container, basically I've completed it. It's completed. The containing of the wine in the container is completed. Then I see it as one thing. So if that's the point when I declare the wine Ma'aser Sheni, so then the sanctity of the Ma'aser Sheni goes on to the barrel that is again 1 unit with the wine is subordinate to the wine. And what does that mean? That the container itself becomes sanctified? That means that if I go and I redeem this onto money, not only do I have to redeem the value of the wine, I have to redeem the value of the barrel itself too. So if the wine is worth 10 shekel and the barrel is worth 5 shekel, and I'm going to redeem it, meaning I'm going to transfer sanctity onto money, then I have to transfer it onto a value of 15 shekel. That's when we say that it takes on the sanctity of the wine. In the first case of the Mishnah, where the Mishnah said that it didn't make a difference whether you had it where you closed the container or not, that's where what you're pouring into it is already Meiser Sheni. If the wine that's going into the container is already Meiser Sheni, then the fact that I close it and make it one unit doesn't affect the barrel. That can only affect the barrel if when I declare the wine as Meiser Sheni, then that declaration will so to speak extend to the barrel that is subordinate, that is one with it and subordinate with it. But if I'm just putting the Meiser Sheni money into the barrel, it's already Meiser Sheni wine, I'm just putting it into the barrel. So then even though you've closed it, it's one unit, and theoretically you could say it's subordinate to the wine, but since the wine is already sanctified, the sanctity then doesn't go on to the barrel. So that's the first case of the Mishnah. The next case of the Mishnah is now going to talk about another case, not about Meiser Sheni, about something else, but again, a difference as to whether the barrel is closed or not. And that is that there is a halacha by Truma, that if, let's say, Truma, which is separated from the grain that goes to the Kohen, that only a Kohen may eat, if it gets mixed up into chulin, into other grain that is not Truma, so in order to be able to say that the Truma becomes nullified in the non-chulin and a non-Kohen should be able to eat all of this grain, there has to be 100 times of the chulin of the non-Truma to the Truma for it to be able to become nullified. Less than that, it won't become nullified. I'll have a mixture of Truma and non-Truma. I won't be able to do anything other than sell it to a Kohen who would be able then to eat it. Here the case is that you've got Truma in containers. And you have one container of Truma, in other containers that are chulin, and the one container of Truma became mixed up, became lost in the containers they're all still in containers, but I have a chulin container and a container of non-chulin, and the chulin and the container with Truma got mixed amongst the containers of chulin, and we don't know which one is which. So the question is, can we apply the thruol of 100 times of the Truma of the chulin against the Truma to nullify it? Now they're not physically mixed together, but it's still possible to consider it mixed because it's lost in it. And actually, we would be able to apply this concept, this halacha, this law, that 100 times of the chulin will nullify the Truma. But it's going to depend. The Mishnah reads, Achalei gafan, if the mix-up happened before the containers were covered, then if you have 101, meaning 100 of chulin, 100 parts of chulin against one part of Truma, then the nullification will take place. Because when it's open, we can apply the bittul, the nullification. Umisha gafen. But if we're talking about that the containers were already covered when the container that contained Truma got mixed amongst the other containers, mekachis b'chol shehein, then no matter how insignificant an amount of Truma you have in comparison to the chulin, to the non-Truma, they will all become forbidden. It's considered a mixture, no nullification can take place, and therefore the whole thing is forbidden. The whole thing has to go to a Kohen. Now, what's the explanation to this? The explanation is the following. The rule is that a davar chashuv, something considered significant, does not become nullified, no matter how much more you have of the permissible against the forbidden. In a case, if it may make a difference, 1 to 1,000, it's still going to make the whole thing forbidden because I have a mixture and I don't know what's what, and there's no nullification that takes place. Now, in this case, we say like this: before the containers become covered, then the nullification can take place. This is considered a mixture, and if I have 100 parts of chulin, meaning of all the whatever is contained in these containers, if I have 100 parts of chulin to 1 part of Truma, then it's nullified. But once I cover the barrel, we say what we said before, step number 1, which is that once the barrel is covered, then what's contained and the container now become one object, they become one unit. A closed container is considered a davar chashuv. It's considered something significant. And therefore, it cannot become batal amongst other containers. So I need to close it. Now by closing it, it is one unit. It's now considered. So now if it's not closed, then I just have a container and I have wine and I have whatever's in the container. Let's say it's wine. And I have wine. If the wine is mixed, the nullification can take place. But once it's closed, then I can't look at it anymore as just wine and a barrel because it became one unit. And now that it's closed, I have here a unit of something chashuv, of something important, something significant. So even though it's amongst other significant objects, other significant containers, I cannot nullify something significant. And therefore, once the containers are closed, and that's when the container with truma gets mixed amongst other containers, then the nullification of 100 to 1 cannot take place anymore. Okay, and the last halacha mentioned in the Mishna is referring to a halacha by truma, that whenever you separate truma, so the point is you've got a pile of grain, you separate part of it for truma, and then the rest of the grain has been exempted from truma. Now, the way that it's going to work, now the truth is that if let's say I have two separate piles, they're both tevel, they both need truma to be separated from, and I want to, instead of separating truma from this pile, truma from that pile, I will separate an amount of truma from this pile that would cover both. I'm allowed to do that, but only if the other pile is close by. That's the halacha. They have to be touching or close by. If they're close by, then what I do in this pile for the other pile can work. If it's close by. If it's not close by, then it doesn't work. So here the Mishnah says like this. How about a case where I've got containers that have truma, tevel rather, untithed, truma hasn't been taken from them yet. And now I want to take from one barrel for the other barrels. So actually, gafan, if you do it for the containers were closed, I can separate truma from one for all of them. Because, again, in proximity, they are close to each other and they're open. And therefore, that's called that the other tevel is close to this tevel, that I should be able to separate truma from this for the rest of them. But if we're talking about that they already were closed, and that's when you want to separate from one for the other, that will not work. Then you need to separate truma from each and every one. Because again, once I go ahead and I close it, once I go ahead and I close the barrel, I have separate units. Right now, this is considered that everything now becomes a separate unit. The wine and the barrel and the container become a unit on their own, then become a separate unit. It's a closed container. It's considered a separate unit. If it's a separate unit, they're not that's not called close anymore. They're separated just from the fact that the whole unit is a closed unit. It's not considered close to it anymore. Physically, they're close to each other. But the point is the wine cannot be considered close to each other. The wines are completely separated from each other. And therefore, truma from one won't work for the others. You'll have to separate truma from each and every one. Okay, so we're in the Chavetz Chaim, Laws of Lashon Harah, Klal Dalet, chapter 4. And in the previous paragraph, the Chavetz Chaim taught that in a situation where you want to go into some kind of partnership or a shidduch or a match with someone, that you'd be allowed to ask information about the person that you want to go into partnership with from someone else, even though the other person may now tell you something negative about that person, but you're asking and he's telling you for a constructive purpose, for the purpose of protecting yourself, not to come to any kind of loss, any kind of fights. And therefore, Lashon Harah is only when you're saying Lashon Harah, hearing Lashon Harah for the purposes of, for essentially what's just to put the person down. But if it's to protect yourself or to protect someone else, it's not a problem. Just that, the Chavetz Chaim said, you got to make sure that the other person knows that your question is for a constructive purpose. If you just ask him a question, not telling him what the purpose is for, and his response is just gossip, even though at the end of the day, you may find the information that you need for yourself, you caused him to speak Lashon Hara because his intention of what he told you was not to help you, it was just to speak badly about the other person. And therefore, the Chavetz Chaim says that you cannot do because you're causing someone to speak Lashon Hara. So I want to read to you from 2 footnotes here. First is, the person that you go over to ask information from him about this person you want to make a partnership with, it should not be a person who dislikes that person. If Ruvain wants to go into partnership with Shimon, and he goes over to Levi to find out about Shimon, if Levi does not get along with Shimon, if Levi dislikes Shimon, that is not the person to go to. And even if we're not talking about that they're enemies, they are competitors. I can't remember the exact wording. But the point is that there's a principle that, in competition, people don't like each other. When you know the person has some kind of dislike towards the person, then number one, you're not going to gain anything from it because there's a good chance he's not going to be completely truthful, or he may exaggerate because it's like the person. But you'll also be bringing the person to speaking Lashon Hara. His intention, his response is going to be out of his dislike. He's going to say to you, oh, I'm only telling this to you for your good, not because I have anything against him. Very hard that when you dislike someone, that there is not some dislike involved in why you're saying this. And therefore, if that is how the person responds, and there is a very good chance that's mixed into his response, he's not going to respond. That's called speaking Lashon Hara. So you, by asking him, have caused him to speak Lashon Hara. So therefore, if you're going over to a person that you know has some kind of dislike for the other person, that person is not the person to go over to, even if you tell him why you're asking, even if you tell him the purpose of why you're asking, because the chances are very strong that number one, you will not get a truthful answer. And number two, he will inevitably be responding from some level of dislike, and that constitutes Lashon Hara on his part. So therefore, when you are inquiring, you're allowed to inquire about a person by someone else. That someone else should not be someone who dislikes the person at any level, about who you were inquiring about. Okay, that's the first footnote. The next footnote is like this. To go ahead and to do this, meaning to tell the person why you are asking, it's something very difficult to do. Why is that? If you tell the person why it is that you're asking for, he may not want to respond. So for instance, Ruvain wants to go into partnership with Shimon. So he goes over to Levi and tells Levi, I want to go into a partnership with Shimon. Can you tell me something about him? Meaning basically you're saying, tell me if he's trustworthy. So he may not want to answer because he may not be one of the person who spoils things. He's not going to answer you, I don't know. I'm not sure, or yeah, he's a good guy, whatever it is, he's not going to go ahead. A lot of times when people know that it's actually relevant what they're speaking about, and they can be breaking up a partnership or ruining some kind of potential, they don't want to get involved. They don't want to be the bad one. So therefore, the person is going to say, look, so if I don't actually look, if I tell them that it's relevant, they're not going to answer me. The only thing they can answer me is if I'm just look like I'm asking and they're just responding because I like to respond. I like to talk about people. Then I'll get my information. Otherwise, I won't. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Avani Ashiv Loi. So the Chavetz Chaim says, this is my response to that problem. Let's say it is permissible. Let's say it's true. You're right. If you don't look like you're trying to get gossip out of him, you won't get the gossip. You won't get the information you want. Nonetheless, The Torah tells us about a nazir. Nazir, the person who takes on a nazirus, a type of a vow that forbids him by saying that if a person says, I am a nazir, he can't drink wine. Okay, so to go over to another nazir and hand him a cup of wine, and then he takes and he drinks it, you have transgressed what we mentioned before. In front of a blind person, don't cause a stumbling. Okay, so now let's say you're talking to the nazir and you want to get some kind of benefit. A permissible benefit. You're doing a business deal with him. Want to convince him to go ahead and sell you something. So what do? You take a cup of wine and say, here, have a cup of wine. And by giving him a cup of wine, you get him to go ahead and agree. Not because you got him drunk, because you did him a nice thing, so he decides to reciprocate. So do we say, well, I only gave him the cup of wine for a constructive purpose for me, so therefore it's okay to give him the wine? Of course you can't say that. He's not allowed to drink wine, and you can't give him the wine under any circumstances. And therefore, the same thing with the Lashon Harah. The prohibition of Lashon Harah is no different than any other prohibition. Now, just because it is that you need something here from this person, you need this information, that now allows you to cause him to sin? Of course not. So therefore, the first point is, the Chavetz Chaim is saying to the person, I understand that your concern may be true, but that doesn't give you license, doesn't give you permission to cause him to speak Lashon Harah. The same way you can't do any other prohibition in order to gain information you need, to gain something that you need. You can't use Lashon Harah for that. You can't cause Lashon Harah that way either. Says the Chavetz Chaim that, the truth is that we don't have to come on to this answer. He goes over to his friend and he says, my brother, I need to ask you something. Please don't exaggerate. Just tell me exactly what you know. There's no prohibition of Lashon Harah if you respond to me. Both our intentions are for the purpose that I need to protect myself and not to put anybody down. I promise you, I won't let anybody know that it came from you. Nothing is going to come out from me about that you're the one who told me. And then you let out, and then you go ahead and tell him what it's about. He'll be truthful with you then. Now again, we're not talking about you going over to a person who dislikes the other person. But again, if you're concerned that the other person says, I don't want to be the bad one, or, what if it comes out that the person finds out that I was the one who gave this information? I'm going to get in trouble then. So basically, you go over to the person and you're straightforward. And you tell the person, explain what you need. You ask him, again, all I'm asking is for the facts. I'm asking just for the truth, just for the facts, nothing more. I want things as they are. I won't be speaking Lashon Harah. I'm not asking you to speak Lashon Harah. It's not considered Lashon Harah. I'm not asking you Lashon Harah. It's not Lashon Harah on your part. I promise you, no one will find out about how this information got out, or, the fact that I know this information, for whatever way it is that's going to be that I will now use information, no one will know about it. No, it won't get out that you told this to me. So basically, you're trying to alleviate all of this person's worries. Says the Chavetz Chaim, you do this, you can be sure the person is going to be truthful. Therefore, there should be no excuse to just look like you're snooping, and the person just respond, to a gossip, because in order for able to get your information, you go ahead and be truthful, open, tell him it's not going to get out that he told you this, if that you're the one that he's the one who told you the information. The person will then respond truthfully. Have a wonderful day. Shavua Tov.